Donkey Kong Land was released for the Game Boy in 1995, developed by Rare as a companion to Donkey Kong Country, released the previous year. The Land title was meant to note its place as a Game Boy game, much like the similarly named Kirby and Mario platformers on the same system. The Japanese name, Super Donkey Kong GB, is even more direct, more or less calling it Game Boy Donkey Kong Country. Once again starring Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong, it opens up with an argument between our protagonist and the patron of the Kong clan, Cranky. As I brought up in the Deepest Lore episode on Donkey Kong Country, all of these characters are aware of the fact that they're in a video game. And Cranky was quite bitter at how much more advanced games were in 1995 than they were in his heyday of 1981. He seemed to think that Donkey Kong Country's success was entirely due to the graphics and music, rather than actually being a good video game, an accusation which the younger Kongs took personally. They then agreed to a bet. Donkey and Diddy's next adventure would be on an 8-bit system. If they could have another success story on this less powerful system, they would show that old ape that their game ran on more than graphics and music. They even promised to let the Kremling steal a banana horde again. It seems that Cranky had intended this to be the outcome from the beginning, and Donkey and Diddy had fallen into his trap. The next morning, the bananas were gone, and the adventure began. Before we get into the Kong's quest for video game dominance, if you want to start your own quest towards discussing Nintendo timelines and lore, I suggest subscribing to the channel if you want to keep the conversation going. Then you can also find a community Discord server linked in the description. First, the to and after the Gangplank Galleon, the Kremling ship that served as the Super Nintendo game's finale, which is still anchored just off DK Isle. The Japanese description states that the ship is dilapidated, probably abandoned after the first Donkey Kong Country. This would be fitting since the pirates are using a new ship, the Flying Croc, as their main base of operations come Donkey Kong Country 2. The final boss of this stage is Wild Sting the Manta Ray. From there, the Kongs head underwater to the ancient ruins of Kremlantis. While the name implies a connection to the Kremlings, that is not present in the Japanese, where the name of the world is simply Underwater Ruins. That said, there's also a statue of the world's boss, Big Clam, on the far right of the map, and the ancient ruins of Donkey Kong Country definitely were connected to the Kremlings, so maybe there's something. The next world returns the game to DK Isle, with the Monkey Mountains and Chimpanzee Clouds. Interestingly, Keenan Pearson, one of the game designers who worked at Retro Studios during the production of Donkey Kong Country Returns, implied that the cliff world from that game was meant to take place here. Though this is still a developer statement made over a decade after the game's release, so feel free to take it with a grain of salt. The boss of this world is Hard Hat the Mole. Hopping aboard a Zeppelin, the two Kongs head for the final world, far from the confines of their isle to the old stomping grounds of the previous monkey to hold the moniker of Donkey, Big Ape City. This manual implies this city to be the same one seen in the original Donkey Kong arcade game, leading to a lot of interesting parallels. The same year Donkey Kong Country released, we also got another Donkey Kong game on the Game Boy, Donkey Kong 94, an expansion of the arcade classic. This game started in the big city, but ended on an island that seemed to be related to Donkey Kong, given the tower that stands on it. This being the last world of Donkey Kong Land draws a parallel to that game, with the worlds being in reverse order. Both games even feature the Kongs crossing the sea by air rather than boat. Interestingly, the manual implies multiple times that Cranky came into this whole thing with a plan, to the point where he was even in contact with K. Rool to make it happen. He also emphasized that this adventure should take place on the Game Boy, the same console as Donkey Kong 94. It seems that Cranky isn't trying to compare Donkey Kong Country to the 1981 arcade game, but instead a far more fair competition against another Game Boy title. At the end of the day, Donkey and Diddy once again faced King K. Rool in a very similar boss fight to Donkey Kong Country. Defeating him, the two recovered the last of the bananas, and once again they claimed victory over the Kremlings. And given that this game had 2 more sequels on the Game Boy, it seems like they beat out Cranky as well. Looking at our timeline, this game takes place in the direct aftermath of Donkey Kong Country 1, and I doubt anything's ever going to come between them. Diddy even says that he still has the bruises from that first mission, putting the time skip to weeks at the very most. And that's really it for Donkey Kong Land. But don't worry, we'll return to the world of DK before long, and keep exploring this magnificent jungle world. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.